Hello, Namaste. Welcome back to Bhagavatam for Rationalists. In this episode 4, we are going to cover a number of avatars in brief. When we left Shuka and Parikshit in the previous episode, Shuka was telling Parikshit, Krishna saved your life before when he prevented abortion in your mother, and his story can now save your soul. Shuka continues and says, but Krishna's story is not that from just one birth to one death. In fact, Krishna has taken many births, and those avatars are all important to know. So, remember, we talked about the nested conversations. When Suta began his speech, he already gave a list of 21 different avatars or Eka Vimsati avatars. And then Suta started narrating about the dialogue between Shuka and Parikshit. In the course of that dialogue, one of the first things that happens is that Shuka talks about a dialogue between Brahma and Narada. And in that dialogue, Brahma actually gives a list of 23 avatars. Now, this is overlaps to a great extent with the earlier list of 21 avatars by Suta. Here is the list from earlier, but Brahma skips two of them. One is Narada avatar and the other is Mohini avatar. He does not include those in his 23, he includes the other 19 and then adds four more. He adds Dhruva avatar, Hayagriva, Adimula, and Hamsa. So between Brahma's list of 23 and earlier Suta's list of 21, we now have a list of 25 different avatars. But you may have heard about the tradition of Dashavatars. Yes, indeed, there are different communities in the world that consider Dashavataras and they enumerate only 10. And the different traditions have different lists of those 10. Usually, everyone has Matsya, Kurma, and Varaha, the three animals in our avatars. And then almost all lists have Sri Ram avatar and Krishna avatar. Beyond that, it starts to have variations in the various different traditions. Typically, though, they do have Narasimha, Vamana, and Parashurama. That makes about eight. And then instead of going with one of these 25, the future avatar, the Kalki avatar, is often used as the 10th avatar. And, the ninth avatar, other than the 8 plus Kalki, you may have Balarama, who is known to be Krishna's brother, or you may have Buddha avatar. In fact, even within Bhagavatam, we see a number of times when the Shavataras are kind of noted or kind of made hinted to, and you find some combination of these 10. So you may ask the question, why the confusion? Why can't someone write down the list of avatars and say, this is it, this is what happened in the past? There are two possible answers to that. First of them is that none of these lists, whether it is Suta's 21, Brahma's 23, or any of the Dashavatara list, none of them ever claims to be a comprehensive list. That's not in the nature of Bhagavatam or in Vaishnavism. There is no one who claims, okay, I know that these 25 or these 50 or these 100 are the only times that God came down to earth to take an avatar. Nobody says, I know the comprehensive list because there are actually millions upon millions of avatars. Ananta Koti, they say, that means unlimited number of crores. 1 crore is 10 million. So, really, there are an infinite number of avatars. Why is that? What exactly is an avatar anyway? And that's the second part of the answer to the question why the confusion. So let's talk about Suyajna Avatar. Suyajna is not one of the more famous avatars. I don't blame you if you never heard of this avatar. But let's talk about his story. ప్రకట రుచి ప్రజాపతికి స్వయంభువుని కూతురాకూతియను లతాంగికి అర్థి జన్మించి సుయజ్ఞుండు నానొప్పునతడు దక్షిణనయను యతివయందు సుయమనామ అమరస్తోమంబు గుట్టించి ఇంద్రుడై వెలసి ఉపేంద్రలీల అఖిల లోకంబులయార్తి హరించిన నతని మాతామహుండైన మనువు తన మనంబున దచ్చరిత్రమున కలరి పరమ పుణ్యుండు హరి అని పలికెగాన అంచిత జ్ఞాననిధి అయి సుయజ్ఞుడలమి తాపసోత్తమ హరి అవతారమయ్యే. So this is Brahma telling Narada in poem number 117 in the second canto about Suyajna Avatar. This is not a poem that has layers upon layers of meaning, it's straightforward narration. So I'm just going to tell you. There was a Swayambhuva Manu. One of his daughters was Akuti, who married Ruchi Prajapati. So, but Ruchi and Akuti had a son whose name was Suyajna. Suyajna became emperor. He became Indra, which is a position that is the king of all gods. And then Brahma kind of encapsulates the entire accomplishments of Suyajna, saying Akhila Lokamula Arti Harinche. That means remove the distress of all the worlds. So it doesn't explain what the distress is, how it was removed, and so forth, but just says he removed distress of all. So let's just accept it that he accomplished great things, helped all the worlds. So thinking about all that, his grandfather, remember Suyajna's mother is Akuti, and Akuti is father of Swayambhuva. So grandfather Swayambhuva thinks about his grandson's history, is very impressed by it, and therefore he declares that Suyajna is an extremely great man. He was actually Vishnu, and therefore, O Narada, he, Suyajna, became an avatar. So that's the point. And therefore, and so, O Narada, he says. So Brahma himself is saying that because Swayambhuva declared it so, Suyajna became an avatar. So that's an editorial decision, that's an opinion of Swayambhuva, and that's what made Suyajna into an avatar. So an avatar, therefore, is someone who has great accomplishments and gets recognition for those accomplishments, that he is an avatar and therefore he was able to accomplish all these great things. And that's the reason that there are millions upon millions of avatars. It's not possible to make a single list of all avatars that God had. Now, before you accuse me and say, as a rationalist, I'm giving you some sort of a twisted interpretation, I'd like to say, no, that's not the case. This was a definition given by Brahma himself to Narada. Check out poem 117 in second skanda if you don't believe. Okay, let's talk about a few more examples, just talking about their accomplishments rather than their whole life history. Narada was an avatar. In fact, he was the one talking to Brahma when that definition with Suyajna was given. Narada was a musician and a musicologist. We're talking about the very early days of human history when, of course, humans were instinctively making music and rhythm and so forth. Now, Narada established the principles of music. Melody, what is a raga? How do you have to go on so that you're not sounding jarring to the ear? How does a raga go in a melody? How do you put a rhythm? How do you put a thala on top of it? And he classified the ragas and said, here are the various types of ragas you can have and how to generate new ragas. So these are the principles that Narada first established as a musicologist. You could say he was the father of classical music. Actually, I would say he was the father of all music because whether classical or not, all songs and all music have their root in the same principles. What sounds melodious? What kind of a rhythm can you apply to various melodies? Furthermore, Narada also preached that it's possible to reach God through music. So, if you learn to sing, if you learn an instrument and you play it with devotion, that is as good as reaching God. This is the preaching that Narada gave to the world. He was, of course, a great devotee of Lord Vishnu himself, and we see this in many cases. Several of the avatars are actually devotees of the Lord, and they have blazed a trail saying that you can reach God if you generate and develop this kind of devotion in your. Let's take another example. Kapila was another avatar. He was a great philosopher that established what is known as Sankhya Yoga. This is a great formula for controlling one's mind. Now, Kapila's mother, her name was Devahuti, she struggled with a great deal of mental anxiety and turmoil in her mind. And Kapila helped her by preaching this Sankhya Yoga to her. We will see Sankhya Yoga again and again in the course of Bhagavatam because this is too important and it is repeated by multiple different avatars. It is preached. So, there are two main principles of Sankhya Yoga. One is the recognition that each individual is not the body that they inhabit, but rather the soul that inhabits that body. And that soul is indestructible. So, if you really understand this principle, then it allows you to take things in stride. What is the worst thing that can happen to one person? You might say, well, the person dies. Well, that's the point that if you believe and understand this principle that the soul is indestructible, then you would never think of a person as dying because the person is the soul and the soul survives and it goes on for an eternity. It's only the body that perishes. So, if the worst thing that can happen, namely death, is also not the end of one's existence, then it'll help you to take bad things that happen in life in your stride. The second principle of Sankhya Yoga is what's known as Nishkama Karma, and this is extremely important, and we'll talk about it again and again in Bhagavatam. What it says is that you need to do your actions, do your karma, but don't be too attached to the results that may come from that karma. And as we discuss more and more, you'll see how it is possible to do an action without being too worried about whether it will succeed or not. Let's talk about a third example of a different kind, that is Pruthu Chakravarti. He was the very first emperor. He occupied and controlled a large territory, but his fame doesn't come from being a great conqueror. Instead, he is supposed to have tamed or milked earth. In fact, in this 18th century painting by Manaku that you see here, Pruthu is kind of in this cartoon depicted on a chariot going after and trying to capture Earth in the form of a cow. So he would be able to capture it, he would be able to tame Earth and milk it of the resources. That means he is able to allow more people to live off the land by teaching how to create crops, how to grow crops, how to grow livestock, and get resources out of the earth for livelihood. So this is reminiscent of a modern day figure, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who is credited as the father of Green Revolution. Green Revolution is something that has allowed a great many people, billions of people in the global south to live without fear of hunger because Swaminathan pioneered this green revolution and allowed for a lot more of the crops to be able to be developed. So the name Prithvi for earth is actually in an homage to Pruthu as Prithvi being Pruthu's daughter because he was able to tame earth and that's why she is called Prithvi. Let's take one more example, also a technician, and this is Dhanvantari. He was the father of Ayurveda or the science of medicine. He taught how to go about diagnosing diseases, how to identify medicinal herbs, and how to treat patients using those herbs. He also taught how to deal with patients, how to behave with patients, and so forth. In mythology, we see him taking it apart by creating Amrita and bringing it out of the ocean to provide it to the world. The picture you see is of a temple to Lord Dhanvantari in Coimbatore. The Dhanvantari temple has an Ayurvedic hospital actually attached to it as well. So let me wait there and ask the question. Well, we're talking about a number of avatars in brief, but who is taking these avatars? What is the nature of that god? We're going to cover that in the next episode. I hope to see you there. Thank you.